Go. Here we go.
All right. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for our sort of inaugural episode of Asymmetrica's invited, talking to subject matter experts, and thank you for your briefing on passports to terror today for Secure Free Society. So I wanted to ask, projecting forward about the trends with this, one issue is how do you see the difference between how the Trump administration is going to handle this differently to the Obama administration? They passed sanctions on Tarek al-Aissami. What do you expect them to do that is a different policy?
Well, I think first, we've seen in the first month already some specific concrete actions that weren't prepared during the Trump administration. They're obviously prepared many, many months, about years ago, that the sanctions we're talking about on Tarek al-Aissami. But frankly, there wasn't the political will on the part of the Obama administration to make that happen. For whatever reason, I can't speak to the administration on why they decided not to run it through the interagency process and have it finalized to be able to issue the sanction. But whatever that hiccup or that hurdle was, it was crossed in this administration. So that has happened. There's also the potential for additional sanctions, even a potential indictment from the Department of Justice. And so all these are things that have been in the works for many years. And the question is, are we going to actually materialize on this? But above and beyond that, I think, given that there's two main priorities for the Trump administration, above and beyond Latin America, one is immigration. Clearly a priority. And the other is countering Islamic terrorism.
Right.
So what we discussed today, and a lot of the work that I've done over the years, merges those two issues.
Okay.
It talks about Islamic terror networks from the Middle East permeating through Latin America, and the assistance of certain governments in the region to allow them to infiltrate our immigration pipelines. So in that sense, I wouldn't see why this would not be a priority for the Trump administration.
Okay.
So far, I think we've seen signals that it will, but that's...
So is that particularly because of the link with Islamic terrorism, or do you see it as a larger shift toward Latin America?
I think it's particularly because of the link with Islamic terrorism. I think in general, so Latin America has long been considered the foreign policy backwater of the United States. That's not new. That's not a Republican or Democrat thing. That's just been that way. There's been a calculation, I'd say, definitely after September 11th, that our national security priorities rest in the Middle East, and then there's obviously pivots to Asia, Central Asia. In Latin America, I think there's been a misinterpretation of the region to say that it's a zone of peace. There's not wars, there's not conflicts. There might be skirmishing, there might be crime, but I think that's a misread of the region.
Okay.
I'll give you one statistic just to hold on that. If you look at Latin America is about 9% of the world's population, but it's 36% of its homicides.
Right.
So if you just look at body counts, and this is not a zone of peace, it's a war. So we have to understand why are these homicides happening. Obviously, it's attributed to organized crime and drug trafficking, but are there other elements, that are other external forces that are pushing this? So my argument is to say that the region is sort of converging itself with a myriad of threats. Islamic terrorism, transnational crime, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, but also extra-regional state actors such as Russia, Iran, China, and increasingly even North Korea. They're starting to realize, just to make a simple calculation, that this is the United States' weakness.
Right.
And so that it makes perfect sense for them.
From an immigration standpoint.
Not just immigration, from an operational standpoint, from a military standpoint, an ability to have operational presence the way we have operational presence in their theaters.
Right.
So like if you're Iran, right, and you look to your right, you see Iraq. You look to your left, you see Afghanistan. You look too far, you in the Persian Gulf, you see an aircraft carrier. So you say, I want to go do that.
Right.
But they can't just send carriers to the Caribbean. They have to build that capability up over time. And I believe that that's what they're doing. At one point, at some point, they're going to have the capability to create the Gulf of Mexico as a forward operating area for them. And not just them, but the Russians, the Chinese, and else.
And to your point about the violence in Latin America, do you think that is that a consequence of just poor governance in the Latin American countries that has then been exploited by these extra territorial interests, or they have exacerbated? It's a chicken or egg question?
I don't. On the chicken or egg side, I don't know what started. Obviously, I think crime and violence in Latin America predated any presence of any extra-regional actor, but I do believe that there is a advantage. Instability and security provides a clear advantage to these actors because it provides them a permissive environment to insert operatives, to do what they do, and just to use corruption towards their benefit. That's always been, I think, somewhat the United States' disadvantage, or just, we tend to run away from corruption. I mean, we're mostly a democratic country that tries to keep the rule of law. You know, Russia, China, Iran, corruption's a day of life. It's a way of life for them. So they come into Latin America, it's no different than what they do in their own countries or in their regions. And so they very much understand how to use this advantageously. I think the United States oftentimes gets set back on some of those circumstances. I do believe that a region in chaos, meaning not just refugees, internal displacement, and all the things that we're seeing in some countries, Venezuela, Colombia, in Central America, that does provide a open space for these operatives and these actors to come in and do the thing.
Okay. One last question about, you had mentioned that the colectivos, in your research showed that the colectivos were being trained by the Basij. Why? What does Venezuela gain from it? Is it just to stay in power? And the Basij, you think, is sort of gaining a hospitable operating environment? Explain to me the joint interests. And why are the colectivos playing ball?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I'll give you my assessment. I don't know if it's entirely correct, but I'll just tell you what I see from my outtake. On one level, if you look at the way unconventional warfare works, and we do this, you never fight your adversary directly. You use a surrogate. Every special forces soldier has been trained on how to use surrogates. It does make sense for Iran to build a surrogate army in Latin America. To use non-state actors, armed non-state actors, such as the Quebrachos in Argentina, or the Enocaceristas in Peru, or the Paleros in Bolivia, to equip and train them, and then eventually point them in the right direction as a way to threat or attack their adversary. But above and beyond that, I think you touched on what the real question really is okay, so this is clearly a service for the Venezuelan government to some degree. Maybe there's an unconventional warfare aspect to it.
But they've also killed some Venezuelan government officials.
Correct. Oh yeah, sure. Sure. The Venezuelan colectivos are actually meant to, I think, also deter any kind of coup or potential coup by the military before the Venezuelan government. So if the Venezuelan military or any other element of the Venezuelan government decides that they want to remove Maduro from power, that's the colectivos who's going to be that first line of defense. So, but the real question is, if this is a service for Venezuela, then what did the Iranians get in return? And I think that's the question we need to be asking, because a lot of the things we've looked at so far is the Iranians helping the Venezuelans in some form or the other. The question is, what did the Venezuelans do to help the Iranians? Okay, maybe the passports is part of it, but what else? And in my research, there's actually territories in Venezuela, Maracay, Morón, Paragana Peninsula, Guajiro, that are actually a high density of Iranian military officials that have control over territory. The Venezuelan military cannot actually access these installations. They're only wholly accessed by Iranian government or Iranian officials. And the question is why?
And what do the colectivos get out of it? Just power and weapons?
Oh yeah,
to just get control of territory.
Course on how to beat your opposition. I think for them it's just a simple training course to enhance your capability, get more power, get more control, and I'm sure they get money at the end of the day. Pay to play in Venezuela. And I'm sure that it was always rumored that Ahmadinejad, when he used to travel Latin America, aside from his entourage, he would have always bags of cash.
Oh really?
And just knew who to pay, when to pay, and how to maneuver.
No doubt instructed by the regime.
Sure. Not buying mojitos or something.
Paying $100 a mojito, that's the way they do in Venezuela. It's just a little overpriced. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for all your work on this. I know I've learned a lot from you as much as I hope you learned from me.
So, thank you.
I'm looking forward to your book.
You're in my book. I know. You're in my book. Thank you.
Do you mind if I get a few photos?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. I'm going to clean that up.